if I have to boil it down, it's you have to sell yourself first, and then you have to sell the how, and then the third thing would be the ROI.
Imagine having direct access to someone who's navigated life's toughest terrains and come out stronger. Someone who's been there, done that, and can guide you with empathy, experience, and honesty. This isn't just advice. It's a lifeline, a strategy session, a chance to learn from my journey so you can accelerate yours. Without the ability to be self-aware and introspective, the ability for you to get to where you want to go, nearly impossible. Hey everybody, welcome back to the David Guttman podcast. I have a really special guest today, guy who's near and dear to my heart, and I'll explain why in a minute. Kian Sarreshteh, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So Kian and I, we worked together. I actually worked for him back at a company formerly known as Crypto.fi, now InvestiFi. So I wanted to, we're going to get into that, of course, but I wanted to start with, I want to maybe go all the way back to the womb, but maybe back to your childhood. And because I am really interested to understand kind of what drew you to the entrepreneurial path. And we actually have never talked about that. So yeah, I'm curious, like kind of how things all started, and maybe why don't we start there?
Sure. So I think it's something that I've observed over the years as well, that being an entrepreneur, I think really is in people's DNA. And if you weren't cut out to be an entrepreneur, oftentimes you're going to have challenges actually trying to run a business and maintain that business consistently. And so I think looking back at my younger days, I definitely have observed some signs that have led me to where I am right now. Like I ran a very small eBay business where I would actually design these like custom playing cards for people, and I would sell them on eBay. That was like the first entrepreneurial endeavor that I had. And then into college, also had another small business where I actually was there was a campus like magazine, and I organized like a sales team that would actually sell ad space to like small businesses. So I did that through college, and then wanted to have like some actual professional experience. And so my first job out of school, and might be getting ahead of the questions here, but my first job out of school, I was doing IT sales. And then after doing that for about 3.5 years, it was really all I could take, I think, working in the corporate world without doing something that was going to, get me out of bed every morning. So, yeah.
So were either of your parents entrepreneurs?
They were not, no. And
how did they feel about you being one?
They were nervous at first because, parents that have supported me my whole life, they weren't sure if they were going to have to be continuing to pay my bills up until my mid-30s where I'm at now. But fortunately, hasn't worked out that way. But yeah, my mom's a teacher. My dad was in IT, and that's sort of, I think, how I got dipped my toe in the IT water growing up around my dad. But no, both very conservative parents. Grew up in a small town in Illinois, Springfield, Illinois, where there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity. And so I never really envisioned my life playing out the way that it has, but very thankful that I've had some good fortune to get myself to this point.
Well, when you and I first met, you were running a recruiting business, and I was recruiting a bunch of people. That's how we,
Yeah.
In fact, I actually, ironically, that I came to work for you because I tried to recruit you to come work for me. But yeah, maybe talk about the recruiting business. And was that your first like real, because I think you did some entrepreneurial stuff before that, right?
I mean, when you think about like recruiting as a business, not to like get too down into the weeds on that, but I mean, it's an industry where it's very competitive. I know you're in a prop trading firm, which is also competitive, but I think recruiting is one of the most competitive industries because anyone can do it. Like all you need is a LinkedIn recruiter license, which is like $200 a month, and then a laptop. And you can say you're a recruiter, right? And I mean, it's not rocket science to reach out to someone and ask them if they're interested in a job, pitch them that job, and then work through the interviews and get them placed in that job, right? And so I was doing that. Part of my I worked for 4 different companies, and I was fortunate to get some dynamic experience where I was selling IT recruiting, but then I would also sell like offshore software development. So I got to be involved in some actual software development projects, which ultimately gave me the experience I needed to do Crypto.fi, which I know we'll get to. But yeah, so I was working for my fourth IT recruiting company. They were all really the same. None of them really gave you tools to be any more successful. They're just like, hey, go sell, go bring in clients. And I'm like, all right, so I'm gonna have to figure this out on my own. And I'm figuring this out on my own, and then ultimately making somewhere between 3 and 5% commission on the revenue that I'm bringing in an industry where I could just go buy myself a LinkedIn recruiter license and get a laptop and do this on my own. So I'm like, I've observed all the people that I've worked for, and I candidly just didn't have a whole lot of respect for the way that they were running operations. And I'm like, I'm 25 at the time, but I'm like, I can do this better. And so I quit my job, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to start my IT recruiting company. And I did. And it's always more challenging than what you think it's going to be, especially your first venture. And so it took me a lot longer than what I had expected. I set aside, I had saved 6 months of like living expenses at the time, right? And my naive 25-year-old self said that in 6 months, I'm going to be, driving a ton of revenue and I'll be perfectly fine. And then that 6 months came and went. And I might have had like one check from a client in that 6 month period, which was not enough to pay the bills. And I ended up, you asked about my parents, what they thought about it. And I think that was the time where they were, super stressed out, and they paid for my college, which I'm internally grateful for, but have always had the mindset that after college, you're on your own. And so they welcomed me to move back in with them. But, when you're 25, I was living in Chicago at the time. Like, that was the last thing I wanted to do, is move back in with my parents.
Springfield, Illinois.
Exactly. So I just started couch surfing on my friends' couches. And I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about as an entrepreneur, and I think that entrepreneurs need to have, is conviction. Like, you got to have conviction in what you're doing. And that's really, I think, what gets you through the hard times, because you're the only one a lot of times that can really see the light at the end of the tunnel and know that if I do these, these few things, that I'm eventually going to get there. And I knew I was going to get there. I just needed a little bit more time, because in recruiting, when you place somebody, they usually have to put in like a 2-week notice, and then they don't start for 3 weeks, and then your payment terms with your clients, like net 45, net 60. And so when you make a placement, you're still waiting like 3 months to like get paid, right? And so, but I had enough business at the time, and I knew I was going to get there. So it took me about another 6 months of like, sleeping on couches, and ultimately made it to the other side. And one thing led to another, and had enough revenue to hire my first person, and then kept growing it. And that ultimately was the capital that I used to start my next venture. But I'll pause there. So,
and I wanted to kind of pivot for a second, because I remember you telling me this story, but I'm not sure if I have the right time sequence right, about how you met your wife and when you met her, and what your living situation was at the time.
Yeah, I love the story.
Yeah, so maybe talk about that, because by the way, one of the things I do want to make sure we cover today is, there really are very few. I know some people that are super successful, but the ones I know that are most successful are usually not. They don't have a lot of the other aspects of their life in order. Their relationships are a mess. They have substance abuse issues. Like, there's all kinds of, crazy stuff going on. And you are pretty well rounded. So, and you seem like you've got a great relationship. I know you just had your first child. So where do I have that timing? Maybe talk about that story a little bit.
So, living downtown in Chicago, first of all, for anyone that's looking to start a career as an entrepreneur, I think it's a great place to do it, because it's it's a huge city, but when you're in the business world or in the tech world, downtown Chicago, it's a pretty tight-knit community, and you get to meet a lot of people, and it's also a lot of fun. Had a lot of fun in the bar scene in my younger days, and met my wife. And at the time when I was couch surfing, what I would do is, when I had I have a check come in from a client, I would get an Airbnb, and I built this relationship with one of the Airbnb hosts that had an Airbnb actually in the Loop, which is a weird place to live in Chicago if you're from here. But I would, rent it out for him maybe a week at a time. And when I would go on dates with my then girlfriend, now wife, I would know that I needed the Airbnb if we're going to go back to my place after, kind of thing. Right. And so one night when we were out on a date, and I had assumed, wrongfully so, that we could just go back to her place after dinner. It was in one of the times when I didn't have enough money to be able to afford an Airbnb, and so I got ready at my friend's house that I was sleeping on the couch with. Went to go meet my wife for dinner. And I had this whole facade that I was doing very well, beyond my means at the time. And so after dinner, I'm like, hey, let's go back to your place tonight. And little did I know, she had like family in town. She's like, we can't go back to my place. I have family in town. Like, let's go back to your place. And me not having a place at the time, and this is like she's probably been to like my place, my Airbnb probably 4 times by that point. And so she's like, let's just go back to your place. Like, it's and so that's when I just like came clean to her. And
how long had you been dating at that point?
Probably 3 months.
Okay.
I got by like longer than I thought I would, actually, if I'm being honest. And yeah. And so, she didn't appreciate the I guess the lies,
the lack of transparency.
Yeah, the lack of transparency. But when you're an entrepreneur, you got to fake it till you make it sometimes. And fortunately, I thought that might actually be the last time I saw her, but she actually invited me to live with her after that. And she had two girl roommates in a small 3-bedroom apartment up in Gold Coast in Chicago. And so I moved in with her. And like up until that point, I had never lived with a girl. I would never thought after 3 months of dating someone I would ever move in with a girl. And the reality was I needed a place to live. And so I'm like, sure, let's see how this goes. And, that to me was the moment when I think I knew that she was the one, that she was willing to look past all the materialistic issues that some girls have a trouble getting past. And I like to say she bought low whenever I was broke. And hopefully she can sell high now that I've had some more success. But yeah, yeah, my wife is a real gem for actually accepting me for who I was at that time. So
yeah, my story parallels that too, but this isn't about me. This is about you today. So, so one thing I do notice is a common theme throughout your whole career, even though you are a CEO, is how much of what you've done is about sales.
Yeah.
Maybe talk a little bit about that, where you think your sales ability came from. Were you formally trained? Was it something that it just came natural to you? Because I always kind of think that life's kind of a sales call, whether it's meeting a girl or raising capital or closing business. But I'm curious about your point of view.
Yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be good at sales. And I think it's why, in the tech space in particular, why so many entrepreneurs that don't have a sales background or don't have experience selling or don't have the confidence to sell fail ultimately, because you can build the best product in the world, but if you don't know how to communicate that in a way that resonates with your target audience, it's never going to go anywhere, right? And so I think my background is pretty unique, that lends itself to the modest amount of success I've had to this point, which is, yes, sales. I did get formal sales training. I don't think it was the best formal sales training, but B2B sales, especially in technology, is an art, and having that experience was a huge help. But then also just being in the tech space and knowing the nomenclature, I think, is the other part of it, because when you're selling technology, you have to at least give off the impression that you know how it's going to work, you know how it's going to integrate into someone's environment, et cetera. And then the other unique, I think, part of my experience was IT recruiting. Like, building a tech company, you have to know how to go out and find the right people. And so like already having that network and knowing how to recruit, I think that's been huge, because just in the business we're in now, like I've had to go out and find some real specialists that without my recruiting background, I may not have known how to do. But I guess back to the sales point. Yeah. I mean, I think you got to know how to sell if you're going to be successful, at least in like a B2B type of company.
So, and I know you and I've talked about this specifically, but I think it's useful for other people to hear a little bit more detail about it, is, what is it that persuades somebody to buy or invest or go to coffee?
Yeah. Invest is the other sales pitch. And you were on a lot of those calls with me. Yeah. So, I think first of all, they have to like you as a person. People buy from people, and you have to present yourself as somebody that's trustworthy and someone that they're going to want to, be in business with for a long time. And so I think selling yourself is an overlooked area in the sales process. You have to be presentable. And then the second piece is just, I think the more tailored you can make each sales presentation, at least in the space that I'm in, the more success you're going to have. Because the reality is when you're selling a technology solution that integrates into a unique environment without having an understanding of that environment and being able to explain with a high degree of confidence that the product is going to work by doing X, Y, and Z, then the sales process usually stalls. So like specifically, you know, we sell right now to banks and credit unions, and the banking and credit union industry just, you know, is notorious for moving very slow. And when you're selling an innovative product that they haven't seen before and they can't visualize themselves how it's actually going to be implemented, then it usually just gets put on this list of back burner projects that probably never get revisited. And so I think giving confidence to your prospect of how it's actually going to work and then the value that they're going to get with it is really important. One of the things that you helped me with that's actually proven to work a lot and move the needle for us is building an ROI analysis out for your prospect. Because at the end of the day, if you're the decision maker is writing a big check, or you know, any check that's going to raise eyebrows at the board level, or you know, if they need to get approval from their CEO, whoever they have to get approval from, they need to be able to clearly articulate why it makes sense to do this, like how it's going to work, but then what's the value they're getting from it. And so I think that was a really, and that's not like that seems fairly obvious to do, but you know, I'm at the time, 9 years into being an entrepreneur, and I never even thought to like create an ROI analysis myself. And so, I think if you can't communicate how your product delivers ROI and value, then you're never going to sell it. I mean, that's honestly when, and you know our story now, and everyone listening does to this point, but you know, we were at this for a good 2.5 years. We were fortunate. We landed a few clients, but since we've had the ROI analysis now for the last like 9 months or so, we're moving the needle in a much more material way. And so I think there's little tricks like that for every industry, right? But I think from a high level, if I have to boil it down, it's you have to sell yourself first, and then you have to sell the how, and then the third thing would be the ROI behind it.
So the other thing I've seen you do really well, because I've been on those sales calls with you, that I think is really hard to do is how do you come across, because we all know that lots of times things are much more risky than we might present them. right. Especially if you're raising capital, right?
Yeah.
But so you've got to do that in a way that sort of demonstrates confidence in what you're saying, but doesn't come across, for lack of a better term, bullshitty.
Yeah.
And so tell me how you sort of walk that line and feel, because I know that's something that I had to wrestle with and get comfortable with myself, which is how do I walk that line feeling, like I'm doing it in an ethical and moral way?
Yeah. I think being conservative actually goes so much further than even giving like moderate like projections, whether you're pitching to an investor or pitching to a client. Like with the ROI analysis example, like you never want to tell someone they're going to get like 500% ROI in the first year, because it just smells like BS, right? And I think that that also ties into selling yourself and being credible, being trustworthy. You're not going to be credible and trustworthy if you're giving these outrageous like projections, whether it be to an investor in terms of how much money an investor can make if you write this check into my business, or to a potential client. And so I think, and this is something that I think I've learned over the years, just as I've gotten more mature myself, I think the less mature entrepreneur always wants to say that their product is the best thing out there and it's going to drive all these crazy benefits for people that are just very unrealistic. And I think the more conservative you are with your projections and the value you're going to deliver, the money you're going to make them, I think the more trustworthy it comes across. There's always a fine line there, right? I mean, you can't say, oh, it's going to move the needle by 0.5% in the next 5 years, because no one's going to care at that point, right? So it's definitely a balancing act. But I think over the years, I've definitely got more conservative in terms of the ROI projections I give people, but then also just like the timing to delivery. Like, and I know I'm making this very like technology focused right now, and not everyone listening might be in the tech space, but there's so many examples of tech companies failing because they overpromise and underdeliver, where they say, oh, we can implement this in 3 months, and then it takes them 3 years to do, and then you lose all the credibility. And for us, for any tech company, early days, having referenceable clients is just so important. And if you're blowing deadlines with your clients, you're not going to have good references, and that ultimately can kill your business. And so I think, I'm getting off topic right now. But
Well, no, I think actually, so one of the things I see you do that you may not even realize you do it, and it kind of ties into what you were saying about maybe not promising the moon, the stars, and the, and all that, is you use what I call softening statements. So you'll say, hey, look, no product's perfect, but this is what we're really good at. And sort of like when you use those softening statements, you build credibility because, oh, he's not telling me everything's, sunshines and rainbows, right?
Yeah.
So, because I see you doing it. I know it's.
I think that's a really good point, and I've actually, I don't know if I do it consciously or not, but I know it's a strategy that I take. Like if you can call out the things you're not good at, when you tell them what you are good at, they're going to believe that a lot more, because most people won't admit to the things they're not good at, right? For whatever reason, whether it's ego or they just are too ashamed to admit it.
Well, not only that, but if you call it out before they do,
exactly,
like there's no gotcha there.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Well, so you did mention ego, and I think that's another really good topic. My experience is C-level executives, CEOs in particular. Let's just say they fall very far in the narcissist, psychopathy, dark triad kind of spectrum, if you will. You definitely are not that. Tell me a little bit about how you view ego, your own ego in particular. Let's just start there.
Yeah. So I do think that any entrepreneur has to have at least a little bit of ego, or else you're not going to have, I think, the drive and the motivation to get up out of bed every morning and go through the journey, that I went through for a year of sleeping on couches to be able to get to the next level. And so I think you have enough ego to believe in yourself, but I think being conscious of your ego is a really important thing, because when you get into these companies that are growing and you start to work alongside people that, taking you as an example, like you say, I always view like us working together, but you say you worked for me, and like, I'm like, someone like you has so much more experience than I have. You've had so much more success than I have. And if I let my ego like overtake like my personality, and I come off as, being cocky, or I come off as someone that like cares so much about my own personal ambitions that I'm not going to take care of the people around me, I think that's a recipe for failure for most leaders. And so I think I do have a little bit of an ego, because I am confident in myself to be able to push the business forward. But I'm also I try and be as humble as I can, and recognize that a lot of the people around me, I'm 35 years old, and a lot of the people around me on my leadership team, not a lot, they're all older than me. They all have much more accomplished careers than I do. And so I want to make sure that they know that I, appreciate everything it is that they're doing, and that I recognize that I'm not the smartest person in the room all the time. And so, and I think that comes through to not just the people that you work with, but it also comes through to clients and to investors. If, you're too overtly obvious about having a big ego, I don't think you're as enjoyable a person to be around, and that ultimately leads to the demise of a company.
Yeah, I'm it's kind of breathtaking. You probably have heard this statistic that I think it's something like 60% of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 in the year 2000 are gone. Radio Shack and Blockbuster and Barnes and Noble and, household names, they don't even exist anymore. I remember I worked at one of the companies I was running got bought by Cengage at the time. They were the second biggest textbook publisher in the world. And man, you see some decisions getting made by egos and you're like, wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because what I find is if your ego, so I totally agree with you. I have an ego too, but an ego is a tool for me, as opposed to if you get your ego hooked, that's a very different thing. Like it has to be my idea. I have to be right. They have to be wrong. You take people who maybe were intellectual heroes for me, someone like Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, Ben Shapiro, people that, like, from an IQ standpoint, galaxies smarter than me, but they all have blind spots you could drive a truck through when it comes to, you know, different things. And that comes from being emotionally invested in being right,
Yeah.
and having your identity tied to being the smartest person in the room. Because as soon as that's true, and you definitely do not do this, you stop taking in new information. The new information that's going to help you avoid that disastrous decision, you know? And if you, as soon as you get your ego hooked, all of a sudden the inflow of new information gets shut off.
That's so true. I think, yeah, when you try and lead from the standpoint of ego, yeah, it just doesn't work. And I really think that's the reason that a lot of entrepreneurs fail. And it's a really hard thing to get in check there, right? Because you can tell someone like the blind spots that they have, but how many people actually take what you say, because the ego blocks even that feedback, right? And then how many people will actually remember that the next time they're in a situation where they could be cognizant of that blind spot, but then they just aren't. And so, yeah.
Well, you know, what I would say about that is, I don't think, to your point, I don't think someone else can point out your blind spot. I think the only person who can see it is you.
Yeah.
And that, again, that requires a level of humility, because, you know, the thing that always strikes me is, even if you're brilliant, you're still going to be wrong something like 30% of the time.
Right.
And that's only if you're brilliant. So how could you be so sure this isn't part of that 30%?
Right.
And for most people, it's more like 40, 50, or 60%.
Right.
And so you've got to be open to being, because I make mistakes. I think about the company I'm running now. I could list off every mistake I've made. I could tell you why I made it, what data I maybe missed that I should have seen that I didn't. But the thing is, I adjust quickly. Whether it's, you know, firing someone that was a bad hire, like I'm the one about, you know, hire fast, fire fast. But a lot of people will be, again, they become emotionally invested in that having been the right hire,
Right.
and you keep them longer than you should. In fact, you know, it's funny. This just happened to me recently, because in my 35 plus year career, the only thing that's been true 100% of the time, and I think you and I've talked about this, is whenever I've delayed firing someone, like I had the thought I should fire them and I didn't fire them. 0 exceptions in 35 years that I regretted the fact that I didn't fire them when I first had the thought. I actually had someone that I thought was the exception, and I just fired them 2 weeks ago. So there's still 0 exceptions in 35 years.
I think you were the first person that I've heard that from. Like, every decision you make to fire someone, you always wish you would have done it sooner. And I think I've gotten better at that, but I'm still not perfect at it. And every person I've had to let go, I did the same thing where I, try and give them, another chance, and then another chance after that, and another chance after that. And then all that while, there's just so much value being lost by not having made that decision to replace them sooner. And yeah, I think it goes back to ego. So I think, being cognizant of your ego, and, me personally is, I consider myself, and I think you say this too, like I'm just a work in progress. So,
right.
Yeah.
Got to be a servant leader. It's the only way. One, I just think it's a happier way to travel through life. Like you said, it's not pleasant being around someone who's got a huge ego, especially if they get their ego hooked easily. I think I've just had this thought when you were talking about it before. I think the reason that might be as common as it is I do think having that huge ego and almost trying to be more than you are is helpful in the capital raising realm. Right?
I think it's helpful in early days.
Right.
I think when you're trying to raise your first check, you have to show that ego to a point where investors have confidence enough to write a check when you don't have much to show for, right? But I think as you grow up as a company, I still, like, at this stage we're at right now, I think too much ego would ultimately hurt me and hurt us in the room with an investor. I could be wrong about that.
No, I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. For that first check, being an asshole could maybe actually work to your advantage.
Right.
But then what ends up happening is you have some asshole-led companies that are funded that don't work out, because that thing that helped them get the capital is also the thing that pisses off their executive team and causes turnover.
Exactly. And you usually have conflict with your board. If your investor takes a position on your board, which they normally would for that first check, then if you don't have the results that you beat your chest saying you were going to have whenever you're pitching that investor, it usually leads to friction in the board. And so that can create longer term problems too. And I think that's an area that I've, again, taken advice from you just in the last year or so, where I've tried to rebuild some of those relationships that I needed to with our board, which I think we're in a much better place on. And I know you're on our board, and so you
let's talk a little bit about your journey, Crypto.fi, now InvestiFi, because I was along for part of that. Maybe the bumpiest parts.
Yeah.
But maybe talk about that, because I think it'll be interesting to people, and also kind of like how you kept your head about you during the dark times.
Yeah.
There were plenty of those.
Yeah, and there still are, but no, things have gotten a lot better. But yeah, so started a company called Crypto.fi back early 2021, and the initial thesis was that was back in like the crypto bull market, and everyone was buying crypto on Coinbase and Crypto.com and everywhere else. And the thesis was, why not just make it easier for people to buy and sell crypto through their trusted bank or credit union that they already have been doing business with for a long time, right? And so we took the path of integrating into what's called a digital banking provider. There are these companies out there that make web and mobile apps for most of, I would say 99% of the banks and credit unions in the US. Before I got into this, I didn't even know that there's about 10,000 total banks and credit unions in the United States, and most of them don't build or maintain their own web and mobile apps. And so by partnering and integrating into these digital banking providers, we were able to provide a white labeled crypto exchange that sat inside online banking. So when you open up your banking app on your phone, you see checking, savings, and now crypto, right? And so you could buy and sell crypto with money right from your checking account, and definitely generated a lot of interest early on. But because we were selling into a regulated industry, we had a plethora of issues. And our first few pilots that we signed up were all banks. And this is right around the time when you joined, I think, and you got to see with me that the banking regulators, the OCC and the FDIC, are much different than the NCUA, who regulates credit unions. And the OCC and the FDIC essentially made it impossible for any bank to launch a crypto offering. This is like middle of 2022. And so the three banks that we had signed up just all got shut down. And so that was some dark times. And then, we stood up the trade desk, you stood up the trade desk, which is a service where people call in, usually high net worth individuals call in. They place crypto orders over the phone. They wire us money, and then we send them, Bitcoin or Ethereum in return. And that was a business I was skeptical of, but I trusted you. And
sucker.
Yeah. we had a bumpy start with some issues we don't need to get into there, but ultimately that company, that subsidiary, started throwing off consistent cash to a point where it got us through those challenging times, where that core business, I would call it, that embedded crypto exchange inside of online banking, was going to be a much longer sales cycle, because we essentially had to pivot from selling to banks to go sell just to credit unions. And then, we were fortunate enough to get a few more credit unions that signed up with us. And even in doing so, we were always one paycheck away from just the company like shutting down. It was like we were dependent on, we had very little capital in the bank left from the capital that we raised. I think we raised 1.5 million in January of 22. And then because those banking regulators shut us down, we went back out to market to raise again. We were trying to raise another 3 million. We ended up raising like 1.9 out of the 3, which we were very fortunate to do. And then even with that 1.9 in the bank, I think it was around March or April of 23 when I remember you told me, you were like, we should start thinking about communication plans to the team and winding things down so we don't, fuck everyone's lives up, basically. And I'm like, you're right, we probably should start doing that. And then I don't know why, but I had a feeling that we were going to make it through somehow. And the trade desk that you stood up that month when we were on the brink of going bankrupt had, I forget how much revenue we did, but it was the biggest revenue month that we've ever had And then the following month was the same thing. And then from there, it was just like we hit our stride really, and it got us through. And then we had interest from one of the credit unions that invested in us that launched with us to invest in us. And then we ended up raising a $5 million round of funding this last December. There's so much that happened in between. I'm trying to keep this brief, but yeah.
What I thought was interesting was because I remember when I first saw the numbers, even I think when I was having lunch with the board member, even before I joined, because you had shared the numbers with me, and I'm like, yeah, these numbers are too optimistic. We're not going to hit these numbers, not a chance.
Right.
I said, which is why I was so strong about, hey, but if we use the infrastructure you already have, we could launch a trade desk in a couple of weeks, and I know just the guy.
Yeah.
Which obviously Brian turned out to be great, but I think that the understanding the capital you're going to need in the runway, and I give you all the credit in the world, because it would have been easy to give up, and you never did. I never saw quit, and that's really hard to do.
Yeah, so. I think part of that was we had about $250,000 in the bank with my recruiting company. And I asked my wife when I had this idea, I'm like, so we basically hit a point where it's really hard to get these digital banking providers to agree to like integrate with a startup. And we got not one, but two of them willing to integrate with us, because there was very few crypto companies serving banks and credit unions at the time. And so they're like, sure, do it. Come integrate with us. I'm not a developer. And so I'm like, all right, babe. Like, we want to hire some people with all of our basically life savings. And, she said, do it. And that, back to my personal story, just another reason why I love her so much, because she believed in me. And when we're going through those hard times, that's really, I think, what kept me going, is knowing that she believed in me and I wasn't gonna just go out without a fight, wasn't gonna let her down. And so I think that really helped my mindset. And I think generally speaking, I'm getting a little off topic here, but I think having someone like that gives you unconditional support in your corner is super important, because as great as my parents have been, they weren't always the ones telling me to go risk my whole life savings to go start a company where my wife is, right?
Well, I wouldn't argue that. I wouldn't argue it's unconditional. I would argue it's based on her experience with you.
Yeah.
So, it's there's no doubt about it. Having someone in your corner that's sharing the risk with you, especially given the fact, and this is true with my wife, like it is with yours, they don't have any control.
Right.
They get to vote. They get to share their, hey, should we do this? Are you okay with us doing this? With our life savings, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, they have to trust your judgment. And again, that comes with a lot of you feel a lot of responsibility when that happens. You're like, okay, I can't give up on this.
Exactly. And the business at the time, like, we were anticipating to drive as much transaction fees as like Coinbase was doing. Right. And then the crypto markets cooled off, and we just didn't have enough users to be able to drive as much revenue. And so we had to figure out a different business model. And fortunately, the trade desk got us through that time where otherwise we absolutely would have gone out of business. And that afforded us the runway to pivot. And yeah.
Well, again, I was there, like the needle threading that had to happen for all that to play out. Because you're right, we had like 2 or 3 months in a row of great trade desk revenue, and then on the backs of that, we were able to show that to the credit union that invested. And
exactly.
And the valuation, was pretty solid, as I recall.
It was for a company that was approaching bankruptcy. But yeah, we were able to speak with confidence about the trajectory of our revenue is going in the right direction at the exact right time to be raising that. And there were times when that deal we had, that investment we had, definitely could have gone sideways. And had that not gone through, we would have been in a much more fragile state. But yeah, and we did, I think, get a favorable valuation because of the revenue we were driving. I will say, looking back now, given that their revenue has continued to increase and we over-deliver on everything we're promising them, it's like, I actually think they got a deal at the time. I don't know. But
you're right. You're right. If we had a crystal ball.
Yeah.
Well, so let me ask you, how do you deal with the stress of it all? Because I think people that are not themselves entrepreneurs, and not only in an entrepreneurial or startup venture, but the CEO of one, or even in the very, very senior leadership of one, because I think a lot of people fancy themselves entrepreneurs, but most people do not have the risk tolerance, not even close to, oh, I could be my own boss. That sounds great. That's not exactly what it's like. How do you manage the stress? Because the stress can be, even when things are going reasonably well, the stress is high. But when you've had as many bumps in the road as Crypto.fi and InvestiFi have had, I mean,
it's I think what I tell people now is, had I known all the issues we were going to have, I wouldn't have done it in the first place, right? But I think being an entrepreneur and sinking your teeth into something that you truly believe in and you're passionate about really gives your life purpose, and it gives you a reason to wake up every day and work through those problems. Like, I don't know if I would have worked through all of those problems if it was for somebody else and it didn't have the backdrop of my wife saying, yeah, let's go invest all our life savings into this, right? So for me, dealing with those challenges, which, every startup has challenges, but I view it more as just part of the journey. And I think you have to try and keep an even keel, because there's going to be great days, there's going to be horrible days, and then everything in between. And as long as you have that perspective and you know that the worst days that you're having, as long as you keep doing the right things, there's going to be better days ahead, which make it all worth it. And I think having that perspective is really important, at least for me. And then just tangibly, like, or mechanically, I guess, like having like a routine where you at least can clear your head. Because for me, I live on the West Coast, I live in San Diego, and a lot of my team is Central and East Coast time. And so I'm oftentimes like up at like 6 a.m. on calls. And so like I wake up at like 5, and then, an hour later, I'm like starting my day, and it's, very intense. And so I always, around like 3:00 my time every day, I always like take my dog on a walk. And that's sort of like therapeutic, where I can actually like breathe. I can think about everything that's happened that day and sort of, digest everything and make sense of it in my own head and get my own sort of action plan for how I'm going to address whatever issues came up that day. So that way, when I get home from my walk with my dog, I'm, more even keel, I'm in a better mood, and I can actually have a relationship with my wife that night and my new son. Right?
How long a walk we talking?
About an hour. Yeah. So yeah,
you got to have a tired dog.
Yeah.
I think the thing I've come to realize is, when I look at the entrepreneurial challenges in my career, they don't all have solutions, but probably 80 to 85% of them do if you stick with it.
Yeah.
There is a 15% of the time you're just screwed. You're just screwed, and there's nothing you can do to salvage it. But I think, and I'm curious your opinion about this, as I thought about it, I think the reason that people that have a bit more of an entrepreneurial mindset can deal with the uncertainty is, while you might be uncertain about whether it's that 15% that there's nothing that can be done to salvage it, or the 85% that just requires a little bit harder pushing, that that in the long game, okay, this one might not work out. Maybe the recruiting business doesn't work out, Crypto.fi does, or maybe, what I'm saying, or vice versa. And so I think that, at least for me, I know that's like, I know what my talent stack is. I know what I'm good at. And again, I can't solve every problem, but I can solve a bunch of them. And I really won't know, except in hindsight, whether this one was solvable or not. I don't know. How do you think?
Yeah, I actually I want to tie the ego conversation we had back into this, because I actually think that's really where I do have an unhealthy ego. Is I think that like maybe 99% of problems are solvable, when I'm probably wrong. It's probably only 85%, right? And so I think most problems that I face, I think I look for ways, and you and I went through this a lot together, where we just look for ways to thread the needle. It's not always an easy solution, but I think that's part of, to me, the fun. As stressful as it can be, it's really enjoyable to solve really complex problems. And, it's definitely gotten me into trouble before, when I think I can solve problems that are not fixable. But I think you have to, when you're an entrepreneur starting something, like starting a new company, you have to know that it's never going to go according to plan. It's going to go sideways more times than you can count. and there's never a straight line to success. And so you have to know that going into it, because I think that's another big area where most entrepreneurs shake out, is they can't figure out ways to solve hard problems, and it becomes very stressful. And then if you don't have a support system, it's even more stressful, and then you just quit, right? And so you have a support system, you have enough, if you enjoy solving really tough problems, then it's just, to me, like part of the job. And doing a startup, there's always going to be things that that you don't know, especially in a new industry. Like, I mean, when the pivot we made to InvestiFi was getting into the securities world, right? So we're offering stocks now through banking apps, which is getting a lot of traction. But like, there's so many, all the crypto regulatory issues we had were one thing. Now there's this whole other set of regulations that I have to worry about that I had no experience with, dealing with, like FINRA and the SEC, right? And so, there's new stuff I'm learning there every day, and and there's new challenges that come with that every day. But we've been able to work through everything, and there's been a lot that's came up over the last year with this pivot. But we've been able to work through most everything, and I don't know, maybe I'm too egotistical though in my my approach.
Well, I don't know. I think you're 35, which is amazing to me. But when you get to 58, you'll probably lower that percentage a little bit. So that's probably more of an experience thing, but it's probably better at 35 to think it's 99%, to be honest. Because like you said, and I would say that's true in a bunch of the ventures, definitely true in the venture I'm in now, that had I known what I was getting into, no way I would have done it.
Right, exactly.
Ignorance is bliss for sure.
It is.
Well, let's talk a little bit, because I think one of the things that people don't understand as well as they should, especially if they're in a leadership position in an early stage company, is how to build the team, and the necessity for the composition of that team to change over time. The people that are going to be right for you day one are definitely not going to be, some of them will, but a significant percentage of the people are not going to make the whole journey. Yeah. And you need different people for different time frames. And being a decent human being and an empathetic person, that's one of the hardest, I would argue that's one of the hardest parts of the job. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Because I know that's part of the hardest part for me.
So I think fundamentally, from a high level at the beginning, you need generalists, you need jacks of all trades, you need Swiss Army knives. And because the reality is you only have so much capital, and you can only afford to hire, a couple people. And so like on the tech side, your CTO has to be writing code. They have to be managing the product. They have to be doing design, right? On the business side, you need just general leaders that can do everything from finance to HR to marketing to sales, and then really understanding. And so when you bring on like the first person, it's like, all right, this person is a generalist enough, but they're a little weak in this area. And so the next person you bring on, you try and, complement that weak spot that first person had. And then you sort of go through that process. And then when you get to a certain point, maybe when you're at like, I don't know, like 5 or 10 people on the business side or the tech side of things, you can start to really like zero in on where there's gaps at, and then how you can start to develop more specialized talent or recruit more specialized talent over time. But I think it's impossible for every startup or any startup to get all of those early hires right. And so even when you're trying to hire generalists, they're not always going to be the right generalists. And you, like, back to your point, you have to fire fast in those scenarios, because every day is critical, every week is critical. And if you're spending money on someone that's just not getting your business what it needs, you just can't afford to waste any capital at those stages, right? And so, but yeah, having the right generalist early on help you get to the level where you can afford the luxury of being able to hire more specialists. And we're fortunate, we're not full blown down that path. We definitely still have some generalists in our business, but we have a much more traditional org chart right now, I would say, for a tech company at this stage. And I think that, once you have specialists and all the right leaders in place leading those specialists, you just start to move with a lot more pace, and your company starts to get a lot more traction. So
the way I think about it is, when you're 25 people or below, it depends a little bit on the industry. I would say it's 25 to 50, depending on the industry and high growth and stuff like that. Below 25 people, the structure of the organization is more around the personalities and the skill set of the people. Once you get above a certain size, then you tend to get a little bit more structure. And some people are able to make that adjustment and some people aren't.
Exactly. And I think, managing that, my biggest thing is like transparency. And I think you would agree with me on a lot of this. Like, being honest with the people that aren't able to perform the functions that you need them to about that always is going to yield better results and maintain relationships. Like there are a number of people that I won't name, but we had to let go. And I was very honest about why we were, parting ways with them. And fast forward to today, I'm like still friends with those people. And so, when you're letting someone go, I think people just appreciate honesty. And those are changes that have to be made. And that's the context I usually provide too, is like, at a different time in our company, you were probably the right person, but at this stage, we need to grow up as a company. Here's what we need from whoever's going to be in this role. And unfortunately, that's just not you, kind of thing. Right. And then the people around you, I think also like the other leaders on the team or the other people at the company, they see that and everyone appreciates that. They want the leaders if you're the type of person that goes to work for a startup, you want this mission like oriented culture and you want to feel like you're on a journey, because that's what's exciting. That's what makes being at a startup worth it to a lot of people. And when you're at this mission focused company, but the leaders refusing to make changes that need to be made, that's ultimately going to hurt the company. And it's going to piss off the other people that are like, why isn't Kian making this decision? Why didn't he make that decision faster? It's hurting our company right now. And I feel that too, because I get feedback from, and when you develop a culture of transparency, people aren't afraid to give feedback to people they report to. Like I get more constructive criticism from people on our team than I ever thought I would as a CEO, which I love. And I'm actually proud of myself that I've been able to create enough trust and have people be comfortable to share that feedback with me, because they know I'm not going to it's not going to blow back on them. I'm not going to retaliate if they're saying that I should have done this better, or we should have looked at this a little closer. And so I'm going off on a tangent here, but yeah, I'm a big believer in transparency, both with the person that you're having to make that change with, but then also just with the broader company who observes those changes that need to be made.
Well, I think the transparency, you can't really have trust without transparency. It's also interesting to me, because I've gotten this pushback almost at every company I've ever been at, because I when I'm running a company, I share all the financials, right? And my board or other senior leaders are often like, you shouldn't do that. Especially if the company's doing well, everyone's going to want more money. Well, first of all, I want to make everyone an equity holder, because if you want people to act like owners, you got to make them owners, right? And if you do, and they're playing the long game, and quite frankly, that's who you want on your team, people that are playing the long game, they're not necessarily clamoring for, for some, they're definitely not clamoring for above market salaries. And the reality is you should be paying people at market.
You're absolutely right about that. Aligning incentives with everyone, especially the leaders though at your company, is so important, because when you make them, I think having an owner mentality is so hard to find in an employee, but you can get them there by aligning incentives with giving them equity and making them feel like an owner. When you do that, you're right. It's crazy just how different their mindset becomes. And I don't even have to tell them to be budget conscious. I don't even have to tell them to, just be smart with the financial decisions that they're making. They just are, right? And you see that. And ultimately, you might pay those people a little more because you're right. And I think, we're very transparent about how well we're doing right now, and everyone gets excited about that. And I haven't gotten one person that's came and asked for a raise. I tell everyone we'll review at the end of the year, and everyone's patient enough to wait until that time. We will be giving people raises at the end of the year because they're all doing well, and we're doing well as a company, for the most part, that is. And I think in the meantime, I see the decisions that they're making saving the company money. So net, we're getting more productivity, and we're ultimately saving on costs by being transparent with financials and being more generous. It's like,
I know it is. I remember I talked to my head of customer support 2 weeks ago. I'm like, please don't ask me about something that's less than $200 ever. Like, it's not worth your time. Right. It's not worth my time. Right. Like, just make the decision.
Right.
Going back to what you said earlier, I think it's really important. I think people underestimate how much, or actually overestimate, when they have that person who they're not doing their job, but they're well liked in the organization, right? Or let's just say they have a lot of tentacles throughout the organization in some cases. I know that this is true at InvestiFi. I know it's been true at other companies that I've run, where you're so worried about letting that person go. And my experience has been universally true that it's way less impactful than you think. That the person who's not carrying their own weight, at some level, everybody knows that. And even if they don't know it, although most do, the day you let that person go and they hear about it, they see the difference after they're gone.
100%. You're so right about that. Actually, I listened to this other podcast back in the day where Larry and Sergey, the founders of Google, were on, and one of their philosophies of hiring early on is like they don't want, they call them glue people that like think they're there to like glue things together, and they have these relationships, but they're not really doing anything. They don't really like adding value. And I've tried to be very conscious about making sure that we don't have those types of people here. And I think when we have had, there's been situations like that, I think, in the past. And when you let those people go, you're absolutely right. The negative impact that you're anticipating is never material, if any.
Yeah.
So,
and the other thing too, that I mean, it's just recently, this person was well liked that I just let go, and everyone's like, yeah, he was a good guy, but didn't really do much.
Yeah.
Like, and it was like, I was surprised.
When you start a sentence like that, if that's the first thing you say about someone, they're a good guy or they're a nice guy, it's like, all right, if that's the first thing you're going to say about them as your feedback, it's like, it's probably the right move to let them go. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I replaced it, because another one is I let a guy go who was running product for me, and I replaced him with someone, and the difference is, it's not like 20% better. It's like 200% better. And he was really, the guy I let go was really well liked. And that one stung a little for some people, but within 3 or 4 weeks of the other guy doing so much of a better job, they're like, what it did was it reinforced their confidence in me. So like, oh, Dave saw something I didn't see. I didn't realize that, likable though he was, he clearly wasn't getting the job done anywhere near as well as this new person is.
Yeah.
And
I mean, if you just explain why you're making the decisions that you are, to me, that's the other part of transparency. It's like, we let this person go. I really liked him, but because of X, Y, and Z, they weren't the right fit here. We're going to bring in this other person because of, A, B, and C. And to your point, that works. Hopefully it works out the way that you expect it to. And then people do have increased trust in you.
Well, so the last thing I wanted to kind of wrap things up with is something that's, it's really important to me on my journey. I think it is for you too, though we've never talked about it specifically, is mentorship. Mentorship in terms of people that, that you see as mentors to you, or people that you're mentoring, and why you see that as useful.
So I think you've been sort of an informal mentor to me since I've known you. First, you're my client, then we worked together, and then everything in between. And I've never, and I had a few other people that were also like sort of informal mentors for me over the years. And I think having people like that you trust and respect, and I think you really need to be thoughtful about who you seek mentorship from, because you don't want to be mentored just to be mentored, or because you're just going to get getting like the wrong advice kind of thing. But if you respect the people that you're seeking out mentorship from, I think it will develop you much faster as a leader and help you avoid some of the common mistakes that those people have inevitably gone through, right? Like, I respect you because you've been an entrepreneur a heck of a lot longer than I have. And I know you face the same challenges I'm facing, maybe in different industries or different circumstances, but essentially the same challenges that I faced. And so having you talk me through those and hearing that perspective is incredibly valuable to me. No, I'm not mentoring anyone. I would love to at some point. I don't know if I'm I don't know if I just haven't been successful for long enough where I'm just scared at any day everything's going to fall apart. And so I feel like I'd feel more comfortable mentoring people, even though I think people probably could get some value from learning from my mistakes I've made. But I'm not mentoring anyone right now because I just feel like I'm not quite at that level of success yet. But
I think your humility is terrific. And I think it's funny. I'll use the word paranoid. I'm paranoid, but in a slightly different way. My paranoia is around my blind spot, because I'm like, the idea of having a blind spot like really bothers me, maybe in a way that's disproportionate. But I think having the paranoia about failing is actually really useful. Obviously not if it's keeping you up at night, but but it's keeping you sharp, that's a different thing. What I would say is, I think you're completely wrong. Is one area where I think you're completely wrong about how much value you have to give to somebody in mentorship. And the other part that I think you're missing is how much value you will get from it. Because what I realize is, when I'm mentoring other people, I mean, conversations you and I've had, it requires me to understand things at a deeper level, because you can know the right decision without necessarily knowing why, right? Again, because a lot of it's pattern matching.
Yeah.
And so what a good mentor does, and I think that, like you said, you have to be careful about who you pick as a mentor. You want someone who, when they give you some advice, is also telling you why they're giving you that advice. And if they can't articulate that really cleanly, you probably shouldn't be taking their advice. And so it forces me to understand things at a deeper level, and it makes me better. Like, I just started mentoring this girl a few weeks ago, who's a trader. She's building her own personal brand and so forth. And I promise you I've gotten more out of it. I've only done like maybe 3 or 4 meetings with her. I promise you I've gotten more out of it than she has. That whole new business idea that came out of it. I mean, and again, it's like, because I'm just asking questions and trying to be helpful, it ended up being, so I think that there's an opportunity for you maybe to in your own personal development, by mentoring people, just because I think you'll be surprised.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I would love to. I just haven't came across the right person that's sought it out for me, I guess. But what I would say is, you mentioned like the why. I think the why is so important, because as entrepreneurs, at least for me, I think it's true for a lot of entrepreneurs though, like, you don't like to be told what to do without justification behind it, because like, I think entrepreneurs are just naturally curious, and it's like, all right, you want me to do something, but like, you're not telling me why. That's just going to make me want to do it a different way, or at least trying to figure out the why myself. And so one of the things I think you've done for me personally is you always give like examples. You're like, you'll give advice, and then you'll give me the why, and you'll say, back when I was at whatever company, I ran into X, Y, and Z, and we approached it this way. And so like, that's also just been really important context, is not just the why, but also like some real world examples of what you dealt with that was similar in the past. So,
right.
Yeah.
So, why don't you tell people maybe where they can find your organization?
Yeah.
If were so interested in potentially being able to convince their bank or credit union, maybe they own a bank or credit union.
There you go. So it's InvestiFi, InvestFi.co, not com, co. And if you're a bank at a bank or credit union, like most people do, ask your bankers to reach out to us, or if you're involved with bank or credit union, we'd love to hear from you.
Cool. Kian, thanks so much. Really
Awesome,
appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.